Welcome back to Henry Felix Discourses, where we talk about CRT and the damage it's doing to the schools. Today we'll be talking about hiring, and that really rounds out the way you take over a school with DEI. Now, if you'd like to follow along with the PDF, I will put a link in the description to this page, and you go to read the report down here, and you'll be able to download the PDF, and that's how you can look at it. Now, moving right along. This is where we'll go. Creating Windsor's adult community. I highlighted the very first word here because creating stuck out to me a little bit. Why are they creating an adult community? Don't they already have one? Why would they use the word creating rather than transforming or recreating or something else? Well, I think it does have something to do with the way the mind of a CRT person works. I don't know how else to describe somebody who's a CRT person, by the way. That's just the way I'm going to say it for the most part. Creating, because it's a Marxist idea. It goes back to critical theory, and that goes back to Marxism. They have the idea that you take down all the institutions and things will just spring up perfectly in a wonderful, liberated society after that of its own accord, and you're creating a new world. And I think that's where that comes from, honestly. I don't know if they intended to put that, and I don't think they're sneaking anything in. But when you're in that world and that's what's going around in your mind, those are the words that come out. Now, hiring philosophy. Winsor is purposeful about attracting, recruiting, and hiring candidates who represent diversity in all its forms. Okay, the goals are threefold. 1, add diverse experiences and perspectives in support of Winsor's mission. We've seen the word experiences and perspectives. They both come back to your ethnicity. 2, to mirror the diversity in the student body. That means they look at the faculty and they see themselves, either in the student body or society in general. That's the head count. Are there enough faculty members of a certain ethnicity? That's what they're talking about. That's what diversity is. And 3, to ensure that all our students, particularly students of color, I highlighted particularly for a reason, we'll get back to that in a minute, have empathetic role models, there's that word again, and mentors from whom to choose. And by empathetic role models, they're talking about people of a similar or the same identity group, intersectionality, or ethnicity, or race, or however you want to put it. So again, it's just like that where we saw them describing teachers. It's race, race, and race. Ethnicity, ethnicity, and ethnicity. Identity, identity, identity. Intersectionality, intersectionality, intersectionality. Ideas, brains, concepts, reasons don't matter. Okay. And by the way, I think we saw the word diversity 4 times in this paragraph. Are we getting bored with the word? Is it just starting to beat us down a little bit? Because either you get bored or you eventually get beaten down when people just keep repeating the same thing over and over and over. It is a very repetitive philosophy. It's not a philosophy. It's a movement. It's an ideology. It's very repetitive and it's not deep. They don't have very much to go on philosophically. They don't have words that mean things. Which is why it's not a philosophy. And we see it here. They've run out of words at this point. And I hope you're getting used to the general number of words that they use because there's not that many. They rearrange them, but there's not too much to it. Committee process. So what they do is they have a lot of people look at your application to reduce the possibility of bias. And I think that's fair. If you have more people look at something, that's better. That'll reduce nepotism and that sort of thing. Okay, I got that. No problem. However, this part, almost red, is concerning. The associate head and director of community and inclusion sit on every hiring committee to ensure consistency across hiring committees and uphold school priorities. That's a nice way of saying we will have commissars there to make sure everybody is towing the line on CRT and DEI. That's what it really is. It's a very strong message to have the associate head and the director of community and inclusion at every hiring committee and essentially overseeing the entire process, always being there. That is what they do in China. They have people there at all the business meetings, in every meeting, all the time. The commissar is there keeping an eye on things. That's what they did in the Soviet Union. This is how you enforce an ideology, whether people like it or not. It sends a strong message. It's a very heavy hand, and it's concerning. That's strange, and it's not normal. Okay, this is not normal. Recruitment. Winsor has traditionally relied on Carney Sando and Associates, and I want to just talk about them for 1 second. They are the biggest firm in the area, and they are a pipeline, as they say in a second. This is Carney Sando, and I look at this. This is all the equity and inclusion. They're very devoted to DEI. Very devoted to DEI. Here's their whole page on this. A page like this is not hard to put together, but you can see that it's important to them, all these resources that they have for you. It's a big part of Carney Sando, and if you want to get a job with them, they don't come right out and say specifically you better be DEI, but the message is clear. The person who was used to really be in charge, and I think that's changed, was Lawrence Alexander, and he would give talks around the area to a lot of different schools, and you can find them online. Sometimes they're a little hard to find, but you can find them. And he talks about how he wants to transform the school and bring in DEI and how good it is and everything. And he'll get a little mad here and there in his speeches because he's saying he'll hint that people are saying he just wants CRT, and he'll say that's gaslighting. That's not true. However, it is true. Everything he says is CRT from top to bottom. Now, so that's who they've traditionally relied on, and they continue to. Really, all the schools do. It's the biggest one, and if you want a job, that's where you're going to have to go, and that's the lay of the land. Right. Additionally, they post on NAIS, National Association of Independent Schools. They're very DEI at this point. They have power of accreditation. They're pushing this. Now, they make a distinction between pipelines and pathways. So they say Carney Sando is a pipeline to getting a job, and they want pathways. So I guess that means you have more opportunities. But let's see what they mean by that. We post regularly with NemNet, an independent school search firm that specifically works with candidates of color. Okay. In 2021, Winsor formed a partnership with StrategyGenius, which is the premier search firm for schools seeking diverse candidates. And it's BIPOC owned. So let's have a look at their websites. This is NemNet, and I'm gonna give credit where credit's due on this, because when they mean diversity, they mean different color faces. And every time you refresh, watch this, you get, come on now. Yeah, of course it stops for the video. But every time you hit refresh, you'll get a new face. I think it's kind of a neat idea, because as far as their advertising, well, yeah, that fits. StrategyGenius, this is their website, and they advertise the very same things. BIPOC owned, diverse candidates. So this is what you're looking at. This is what Winsor is doing to hire people in the future. Now they go on to interview questions. Now, good for them for posting them. You know, people can get ready. NemNet talks about getting ready. And by the way, I will be talking about Carney Sando more in another video. I can't do everything all in one video. We don't want anything that long as the last one because it's impossible to edit. We'll be talking about them another time. Winsor. But good for them for posting these. NemNet says you need to have people get prepared, and that's fair. That's good. And Winsor is very open about their stuff, basically, other than maybe the history department. They're not covering anything, and in fact, they're advertising it. They expect accolades and gold medals and everything for showing how devoted to DEI they are. We're number one, and remember, they said, and we always have been. Okay, so this is a feature to them. This is a feature to them. But anyway, standardized questions. So instead of an impromptu interview, they're moving away from the practice of an impromptu interview. They'll have standardized questions. Also kind of fair. You know, I mean, I think if somebody is a fair person and has a brain and a reason, then they can conduct an impromptu interview and get to know the person and ask relevant, decent questions. But there is a place for standardized questions too, because if you're comparing people and you want to have it to be a fair process, you would ask everybody the same thing. I don't know exactly how strict Winsor is. I wouldn't know. I know some schools are extremely strict. They have a panel come in. They hit you with one question after another, and they're all the same for everybody. Then they pick up their papers and they leave. That's the process. And I don't think they're that strict, but Anyway, it has its pluses and minuses, and I think I would say they're trying to do the right thing. So questions designed to assess cultural competency, which is interesting because the suggestion is you're not competent if you're not part of DEI. Like, you can't be a teacher who's saying, well, I'm really not so sure about that whole thing. I'm not really into that philosophy or that movement or ideology, whatever you want to call it. I'm really not on board, but I do love math and I want to teach math. Well, okay, we're going to find somebody else. You're out of here because you're not competent, because you're not fully on board with DEI. That's how it works. Okay, so to integrate it into the interview question, there's a mistake there. There are some mistakes. Have found some mistakes. Mistakes are okay. This is a big document. It's hard to get it perfect. There's one coming that says something, though. To assess a candidate's commitment to DEI work by comparing responses. So you got to be committed. Okay, now these are not all the questions. These are the cultural competency interview questions. So this is not the entire interview, but obviously it's a big part of the interview, and I will read these questions and try to keep my commentary to a minimum. Can you give an example of how you're able to differentiate instruction for different learners? Now, I highlighted differentiate because this represents another fad in education, much like learning styles. Sounds good, not true. Differentiation means that you're coming up with a different curriculum for each and every student, which in theory is great. And if you could afford a private tutor to teach students one or two at a time, you could definitely do that, and it would be fantastic. That would be like Aristotle teaching Alexander the Great. Not that he seems to have gotten through to him, but that's what it would be like. You can't really do that in the classroom. If you have 17 students and you're one teacher, you can't have 17 different curricula. I've seen people have to do that with things like spelling lists only, and it's a nightmare. It's really just impractical. However, as for in-group competition, it's saying, well, you're individualizing, which is what you should do as a teacher. You have to individualize to students. You have to be flexible about their different needs. That's individualization. But I am going to differentiate, and I've got a book that says differentiate is the new idea, and it's perfect. And it doesn't really work. It's too much. It's just not practical. Now, I point that out because CRT and DEI, I mentioned, to me, originally were the next fad. Like, okay, this will be around for a few years and it'll dry up and go away. No, not at all. This has been around for decades now, since the 60s and 70s. They've been pushing for this for a long time. And it is not fly by night, but it is a very strong movement. So what Winsor's done is they've taken on this movement. They've embraced it fully. And they also have some of the fads like differentiation and learning styles. So at some point, you really are going to be pushing off the end of that bench the curriculum, which we read, which is a good curriculum. But eventually, that's going to have to start getting shoved off. There's not going to be really room for all that old-fashioned type stuff. And people really in favor of CRT, and if you go the next layer down, in favor of Marxism, do not care about the curriculum. They do not care about Winsor School. They do not care about the students, and they do not care about people of color or any other identity group. They care about advancing Marxism and destroying the system. Whether they're successful with that, I don't think the headmaster or headmistress, whatever they call her, I don't know what they call the person at Winsor, would probably not say that they are trying to destroy Winsor School. And that's not what I mean by that. But that's where the momentum is. That's the energy. That's the force, is towards that. And it comes at the expense of old-fashioned things like a real education. All right, moving on. That was only the first question. We're going to pick it up. How do you deal with difficult material when it comes to race/diversity in a mostly white class? How do you work with students from, particularly those who come from different cultural backgrounds than yours and or from historically marginalized groups? This one interested me because from should not be there. I think I see the editing process. They started out with, how do you work with students from different cultural backgrounds than yours? But they wanted to turn it up a little bit and be really specific about what they mean. They use the word particularly, again, which we saw up here. Remember I said to Keep that in mind. So somebody said to him or herself, well, we want to just take that heat and just turn it up a little bit, because that's what you do. You get people used to one thing, and then you turn it up a little bit until they're used to that, and then you turn it up again. So they inserted that, and they forgot to take away the word from. And I'm sure they read this over, and I'm sure probably more than one person read this over, and you just read something like that over because you know it's supposed to be there, and we all do that. But I think it's a window into what their thought process is here. It wasn't good enough to just say from different cultural backgrounds. They had to also say, particularly those, so that we are fully clear on what the emphasis is. All right, next, describe your experiences in serving or teaching historically marginalized communities, privileged communities, diverse classrooms, or homogeneous classrooms. How did you or would you educate students about diversity in these different settings? What have you done in your school to promote and encourage girls in your discipline? What does diversity mean to you, and in what ways is it personally relevant? This is where being professionally competent is not good enough. They also want, or being professionally devoted is not enough. They want personal devotion. You've got to have both. Now, it's kind of fair for a private school to ask for that, but that's what they're asking for. They're not asking for someone just to fulfill the job description. They want you in your mind also totally behind this. And they're going to be weeding people out who aren't. How do issues of race, class, and gender come up in the classroom? How do you handle them? There's that word class again. Which indicates its roots in Marxism. What do you do on a regular basis to cultivate your own appreciation for diversity or improve your cultural competency? What do you do to promote inclusion and respect for differences in others? How do you challenge stereotypes and encourage authentic relationships? Open-ended question. This is not about the workplace. This is about your life. IRL, how do you do this? How do you do this in real life? So they want not just professional commitment, but personal commitment. It reminds me of Yogi Berra when he talked about commitment. The chicken contributed to the breakfast with the eggs, but the pig's committed, right? Because he gave the bacon. So they want the bacon, not just the eggs. Why do you want to work in an all-girls environment? What challenges might you face? Describe a situation in which you encountered a conflict with a person from a different cultural background than yours. How did you handle the situation? Notice they're kind of going one for one: professional, personal, professional, personal. How do you diversify your communication, curriculum, pedagogy, assessments, etc., to better meet the needs of all students? This question, I believe, is confusing because we know what diversity means to DEI in their world. How you diversify communication according to that is hard to say, isn't it? Curriculum, maybe, by maybe having more representation in your curriculum. But if they're talking actually about diversifying pedagogy, maybe they mean different modalities of teaching. There's a long list. It's hard to make that word work in the same way for each part of this list. And assessments, all right, how do we diversify assessments? What does that even mean? Now, it may be that this is one of these cases where it's like the last question. They're just kind of making up stuff at this point. I mean, it seems like people have gone through this pretty thoroughly, but at some point you're just using words and throwing stuff out, diversity, blah, blah, blah. Let's get in communication, curriculum, pedagogy, and assessments, and just have that somewhere and have it be a topic of conversation. Maybe that's what it is, and maybe it's not a very thoughtful question. But at the same time, there are interviewers who like to put people on their back foot and get them a little confused because they feel like as the person struggles to find an answer, they will have an answer that they could not possibly have prepared, because a question that's confusing is not something that you would expect to be asked. And they feel that they're going to get the truth by doing that. Now, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's fair to the candidate. Even if they do it anyway, I don't think you're going to get any closer to the truth with something like that. You're just going to get an answer where the person is confused. But also, my advice to anyone who has an interviewer who does that would be to thank them, go home, and never talk to them again. Because if they're playing mind games with you in the job interview, mind games will never stop, and you will be miserable. So if indeed that's what that is, and I'm not saying I 100% believe it is, but I kind of think it might be, then that'd be a sign that you don't want to be there. You don't want people playing with your mind from the very get-go. That's not a good environment. Anyway, the process used to hire staff members at Winsor is much the same as that used to hire faculty. They're posted on the same Winsor careers page. Now, this is sort of a very progressive. This is the kind of thing that comes straight from a socialist regime where everybody's the same, no matter who you are, all the way from headmaster down to plumber. We're all on the same career page. We all have the same application. We all get the same questions. That sounds fair, but I mean, are we really going to be asking the groundskeeper all of these questions? Is it really that relevant to his job or her job or their job? Really? And if they're going to go down that route, now what happens when these very privileged girls are sitting in their classroom and look out and see that the groundskeepers are almost all Hispanic? What will Winsor do at that point? Will they say, you've got to hire more white people to come in here or people of different ethnicities so that it reflects the community that we're in? Or will they be asking that question before they hire them? Like, how many people of each race do you actually have in your company? Those are very strange questions and just uber privileged type questions to be saying, we believe in CRT so much that we're going to ask you a question like that. It'd be mind-boggling if they actually do, but there have been stories. I've got one in mind, and I'm thinking I'm not going to put it up for this one, but where that exact kind of thing happened. Maybe I'll mention it in another thing. I'm thinking about it, but stranger things have happened. Anyway, coming back to this quote, which I skipped over, right? For a reason. We do it at the end. Let me just read this. Students learn best in the context of a trusting, caring relationship with a teacher. And those connections, we saw connections in the last one. Connections were ethnic connections. They did not define it in terms of establishing a rapport, getting to know the child. They didn't do that. Are the hallmark of a Winsor education. We recognize that anything short of a shared commitment, that's the personal part, to broaden representation, we know what that means, in the adult community directly undermines the education of all Winsor students. So think about what this just said. Unless they're ethnically appropriate to us, percentage-wise, numbers-wise, or have the right representation groups or identity groups, if that's not in place, that will undermine the education of all Winsor students. To me, that sounds crazy, and to me, that's couldn't possibly be more wrong. Educators are people who have brains and ideas and knowledge of their topic and do make connections in terms of rapport and are motivators and get people to love the subject, get people to be confident in themselves. That's what makes a good teacher, not someone who is of a certain identity. So I don't think that could be more wrong. That's completely backwards. And the fact that that's, put up as this giant quote is kind of amazing. In hiring teachers, we are resolute in our responsibility to ensure that our process prioritizes candidates with a diversity of experience and voices. We know what that means. And those with demonstrated work in areas of equity and inclusion, and teachers who have made a lifelong commitment to professional learning and growth. We are, in other words, relentless in our search for teachers who will make a difference. And this is associate head of school. This is coming from the top, okay? Relentless. What does relentless mean? Well, let's just get back to the basics. Relentless is a free dictionary. Unyielding in severity or strictness. Unrelenting. Persistent and unremitting. Implacable, inflexible, inexorable. Sustained and unremitting. Now, watch this. This is going to be kind of, as long as it works. We open the thesaurus, and I have to go to it quickly and show you. This is kind of cool. You see that? I like that with the free dictionary. Anyway, it's a great visual representation. So anyway, there's a merciless side and there's an unremitting side. Both of them are a little heavy, don't you think? But, merciless, inexorable. implacable, pitiless, undeviating. Look at the antonyms. Merciful and submissive. Yeah, merciful is not part of it, really, is it? The better part, unremitting, we do have unbroken, unfaltering, unflagging, unrelieved, nonstop, unabated, incessant, unrelenting. Those are mostly things that are annoying. And yeah, I think the number of times we saw diversity on that page, after a while it gets annoying just to hear the same word over and over again. She could have used a word like unflagging or devoted or principled even, but she didn't. She said relentless. And that doesn't really surprise me because all these synonyms, here's another list, obdurate, grim, ferocious, inexorable. These are all things that describe a Marxist. They never stop. They just keep going and going and going, and they're not listening, and they don't care. So that basically sums it up. So their process, they've gotten a little bit of pushback. To me, it's pretty clear they've gotten a little bit of pushback from the faculty. Not everybody's totally on board. But CRT people are nothing if not patient. This started all the way back with Marcuse, Horkheimer, Adorno, others in the 60s and 70s with the Frankfurt School. They wanted to slowly take over the colleges and then work their way down. And that's exactly what's happening right now. So if they have to wait a few more years for somebody to retire and then they want to replace that person, they will replace them with someone who has had all of these questions, who's been through this process, who's come through Carney Sando or Nemnet or Strategenius, and who goes through a process that is overseen by the associate head and director of community and inclusion to ensure consistency and uphold school priorities. In other words, to toe the line. So that's how you get a school of ideologically like-minded people and very zealous people as well. So anyway, that's my description of what's happening. I would love it if you would give me your opinions on this. If you think I've got something wrong, please put it in the comments. Thumbs up if you like it. Share it if you like it too. We don't have to accept this. This is not inevitable. We don't have to accept that this happens to our schools. And what we have to do is educate ourselves about what's going on and spread the word and let people know what the truth is. So I hope I've been a help to you on that, and I hope you're back next time.